Thank you, everyone. So first I'll just describe a little bit of my background. So I'm currently a business analyst and product owner for Fiserv. I have dabbled in different areas such as QA, dev, a bit of sheep farming, a good range of things. And the company that I work for, many of you might have previously heard of MCOM. So MCOM was previously acquired by Fiserv 2 or so years ago, and it's quite a different environment for us now. When I first joined, we sort of had 50 people there. That was 3.5 years ago. Now we've got about 300 in Auckland. So really what I'm trying to show with this slide is the sheer scale of our company. So the scale can be seen in terms of our revenue, which is quite significant, and the money we move through our systems. So we move over $1 trillion annually, and we have I think there's about 22,000 employees working for Fiserv. We have historically kind of started off as a holding company, and that's why we have quite a few acquisitions under our belt. But we're sort of unifying ourselves and becoming one company, really. So we're trying to roll a bunch of people into the fold. So we've bought so many companies, trying to purchase best-of-breed companies in the financial services area, mainly in the US markets, and so that's what we're focused on. I work in the Auckland office. We are across 2 buildings, and as I've sort of mentioned, we have a challenge of having huge growth. The New Zealand product team, so that's the team I work in within Auckland. We specialise in mobile banking, mainly for the US market, which has over 10 million users, and we're ranked #1 in the US. We service that market with 12 Scrum teams, and so that's sort of the size of the challenge we'll be talking about today. The area our business operates in, as I mentioned before, is mobile banking, and these are some of our products ranging sort of from the left, where we've got an internet banking product, and then moving through the, I guess, almost generations of technology. We have tablet banking there, and then that's showing a US bank, and then one many people will be much more familiar with is the ANZ Go Money app, which we were involved with. And on the far right, if you read Stuff or scoop.co.nz, there's recently been articles about mobile banking on Google Glass, so that's something we're exploring. We are divided into different areas. As I mentioned before, the area I come from is the product piece of the company, but we also offer customizations and other more generalized banking services. So today I'm going to be talking about a business challenge we faced. To me, this challenge resonated with me personally quite strongly, and then we'll be looking at what caused this challenge. Then I'll be making a pitch of why I think it's relevant to all of you here, because I think it's a shared problem, hopefully many of us can get rid of or minimise. And then we'll be looking at various social challenges we had, followed by a demo showing our solution. I wouldn't say it's the solution, but it's a solution that works for us. And then we'll be looking into the results of that. So how many people, if I can get a raise of hands, use Word documents currently for specifications? So that's maybe a third of you. So yeah, that's quite interesting. We did maybe about a year or 2 years ago. So we've moved away from that in favour of this approach I'm going to show today. So our challenge, so we had a really long project, or I guess for us it might be a typical project, which was about 12 months long. And in that project, at the end, there was a whole bunch of unexpected documentation work. So at that time, I just joined the business analyst team, and I was really disappointed to find out what I'd inherited. And even more disappointingly, the work surfaced in the last 6 weeks of the project, which, given the project's sort of a year long, gives you an idea of the challenge and the pain we faced in that one. So the project was successful, but certainly we made things very, very painful for ourselves in our final hour. Because the project was going into a phase where it was sort of going into handover, we had other projects and product lines starting up. So we had key members of our project teams leaving, and that made it challenging for people to move to their next projects, which arguably has knock-on effects for those other projects as well. We also had some quite challenging stakeholder requirements, and it kind of felt like the goalposts were moving for us. So we were trying to hit a moving target while having all of this pain sort of mentioned up here. So fun times. This, I believe, is common beyond FICEV. And I believe it's common because, well, one of the resources which I have found is the Chaos Report by Project Smart. And if you look at the items highlighted in bold, you'll notice that they probably have a very strong correlation with specifications causing impact to projects and causing them to be cancelled. I would argue 20% is significant enough for that problem to be considered a fairly major shared problem. But I'd equally argue that possibly there are other areas like lack of user involvement, for example, where that could have knock-on effect, or part of it could be a specification problem where maybe we have engaged the users but we haven't documented it and things like that. So I think this could apply to you. For us, the way we identified the cause of all of this challenge was to use retrospectives. We use both team retrospectives, as we normally do through our Scrum process, but we got a lot more data through our post-implementation review. Sometimes I refer to as post-mortem. And we also looked to get stakeholder feedback as well, specifically around the specification areas. So we noted all of that down. As usual, there's a lot of noise with these sorts of things, so there was a process of trying to rank our highest priorities, and it seemed to come out that we were having challenges around our three amigos. So the three amigos are the BA, QA and Dev typically. And the challenges we were having was trying to get them to think in a way that's collaborative. And the challenge we were having is trying to make social change can be very, very difficult, but equally there's various artifacts that each produce that are clearly out of sync. And so we need to somehow raise our game so that we can get ourselves in sync. And so that leads to my next question of how many people have seen inconsistencies between specifications, test cases, and their code base. Can I get a raise of hands for that? So yeah, that's most of you. I'll assume the rest are too tired to put their hands up. So we certainly saw that, and it was quite painful for us because at the end of that problem project I was talking about, we sort of fine-tuned our specifications and tried to get them up to scratch, but equally we had to get the test case back into line with the specification and the code, so it becomes quite painful. And so from my perspective, I think these are the three sort of key areas, which I think Goiko briefly covered in his keynote. So our core problem seemed to boil down to keeping our test plan, spec to build, and code in sync. It's quite painful to synchronize them. We were synchronizing them by hand, so we would tend to, if we spotted things, try to tidy them up, but generally we'd tend to find that a more coordinated effort was required to make those synchronizations happen, and they were very, very painful for us. An example being, once I believe we had multiple channels. We had a web channel, it had various text in that channel. We wanted that to match the mobile phone, but then when we went to try and do that, we actually realised that the specifications for both were wrong as well, so we kind of had to sync the specifications up with the code, work out the changes we were going to make, and then get the changes to come back out. And so that took us a matter of months. So the problem, like most problems, gets worse, especially in our business domain. We do write specifications to build, but we also have a lot of satellite specifications which hang off our specifications to build. Things like contract specifications which go out to customers where they agree on what they're purchasing. So we obviously want to be very careful what information we put in there, because once it's out, we're commercially obliged to meet that. We have user guides telling people how to use the software. And we have a bunch of other various ones, such as operational information, things like how do we keep our system up and running. And there's not so many when it comes to the QA part. At least maybe I'm a bit naive on the QA side, but and same with the code. We tend to have things divided into frameworks and products, and they're fairly easy to maintain comparatively. We typically found between these specs we would tend to repeat content in here 2 other times in various satellite specifications around here. So we wanted to find a way of getting away from that. So our problem gets a bit deeper. So in our company we support multiple channels, being web, tablet and mobile as some of the more easier to understand channels. We currently, or previously, did not specify things in a way where they could be shared across different channels. We would tend to write the specifications once per channel, which I'd be interested to know how many people, if you can raise your hands, currently do specify similar business cases differently for different channels. Can you? So only a couple of you. So this might be a little bit more Fiserv-centric, but I'm sure this concept could be applied to your businesses once I show what I'm getting at. So with this, the challenge is our business case is 95% the same between these different channels. We should be able to specify once in a way that we can kind of reuse pieces of our specification using techniques like referencing. And essentially that's what this sort of intersection piece here is highlighting. There are various things like back behaviours which might be quite common across tablet and mobile. It's almost common across web as well, so that might sit in here. The more we can sit in the middle there, the more reusable value we can get, and if we start up a new channel or something, then hopefully that channel, it sits within that. So it's all about trying to specify things once if we can, and if there's value in doing that. The goals of what we were trying to achieve, we wanted to achieve a single source of truth. So Goiko in his keynote mentioned multiple sources of truth, and this was a key thing we wanted to get ourselves away from. So there is a term, if you Google it, single source of truth, which seems to be a concept which can be applied at any different level of the business. For example, a marketing team, if there's multiple people dealing with a client, they probably want to give the same messaging to that client so that client doesn't get the impression they're working with 2 businesses or something like that. And we also wanted to automate to enforce our consistency. So if we do specify things once, we want the ability to have automation to help us produce those other specifications. Because one of the challenges from having things written down in one place can be that you can reduce readability significantly. So we wanted to try and find ways we don't suffer from that. And the 2 goals kind of go hand in hand. Having a single source of truth would be very difficult to sort of stomach without automating to enforce consistency. So from my mind, the 2 concepts go hand in hand. Our requirements. So we wanted handwritten content to be preserved. So if we wrote something in a wiki or a Word document, we wanted to make sure that any custom content was not overwritten. It seems fairly basic, but it's always a bit scary if scripts go through and kind of delete all your specifications. It's something which resonated with me quite a bit because I didn't want to be responsible for doing that. And specifications must be able to update quickly. So from what I've read around various automation communities, there seems to be some agreement that there's diminishing returns on automation results after they come back after a certain amount of time. So for example, if your automation took 3 hours to run, the feedback loop is 3 hours before you get the results of what you're executing. And so after 3 hours, your developers probably, their mindset has changed, maybe they've moved on to a new piece of work, so they end up having to context switch, which I'm personally against, and hopefully you guys are too. So we had a goal to try and get it to under 15 minutes, and we managed to get it to about 3 or 4 minutes for our specifications to update. It must be able to also scale to enterprise environment. One challenge we had with our old approach was we have 12 Scrum teams. Writing specifications across 12 Scrum teams, you can ensure individual consistency fairly easily, but when you try to combine them together, it can look like each piece of the document has sort of come from a different company. So we really needed to come up with some sort of a consistent output. And we also, I guess this one resonates with me quite a bit, wanted the ability to not have a system which enforced conformity. We wanted to enable flexibility in the way people write their specifications, because we are about people, not tools. This tool's really to help us be more efficient. And also, as mentioned earlier, the three amigos seemed like they were a little bit out of alignment, so we wanted to try and bring them closer together. So the solution we came up with has 4 main parts. So I'm going to demo it after this slide. The first part is user stories. So many of you are probably familiar with the sort of BDD, given, when, then type stories. So that's how we decided to write our core walkthrough of our specification. The next part for us was getting textual data from the code base and publishing it to our document source. The point in that is previously we've had synchronization issues where prompts are specified in our spec. We have them in the code base, but they don't match. So we decided we'd get rid of the specification and have a generated view of that data in our specification. And then the next 2 sections were kind of bonus sections we put in there. So technical diagrams are things like sequence diagrams generated from our automation test runs. And we also have mock test data, which sets up various users and things so that we can access the system immediately in a local environment. So I'll move on to the demo. Okay, so I'll just prepare this. Okay, so that's probably a bit small to read. So I've set up a Confluence wiki. On the previous slide, it had a wiki piece in the middle. So the wiki was our main area we wanted to capture documentation, but we do still deliver it in Word document format. We just use tools to extract it from the wiki. A wiki we find is a bit more collaborative and easier to use. So I will go through. I will through now. So the first specification I wanted to show was our login specification. Just move that to the side so that everyone can see. Can people see from the back? Yeah. Okay. So the first piece we have I wanted to show is the description. The description here is not content added in the wiki. It comes from a web page, and so that's published output from our feature file. So I'll come back and show you what the feature file looks like. But the main point is we're not duplicating content here. This is in our BDD test. Then we have our screen flow. So this is kind of the keystone for our specification. One challenge we had previously in the past was we numbered everything, and it becomes quite challenging if you remove a number or your numbers get out of sync. And so we had that happen a few times. So now we've come up with labels, whereas labels don't tend to conflict or mix intent. So these are our labels at the top, and our stories will refer back to these. So this gives all of the context behind our stories. If I zoom out a little bit, you can see the full overview there. So this feature has a username page where they enter their username for mobile banking. Then they have a password page. The piece you're seeing in the middle there's a security question. A security image. And then the last screen is a terms and conditions, assuming it's a first-time user. The next thing to call out is that we have, because we have this convention, we have a lot of consistency between our stories, because it provides the hook in, which I'll show you in a bit. And also there's a lot of modularity in that this security question piece here is something which can be reused over the application. So if you seem like a suspicious user or a fraudulent user, we might ask you a security question. So that might happen during the login flow, or it might happen before you do a transfer of money, for example. So we're trying to make sure we don't specify it twice, pull it out into its own specification and link to it. And we do the same for the continuing flows as well. I'll come back and show the back navigation specification. The next steps we have are our page or our stories, which relate to the wireframe. The convention I mentioned previously was around these various screens. If you look here, there's username and password. If we look down here, this is describing a navigation or movement between the username and password page. We try to break it quite small so that any changes in the system have a minimal impact to our stories as well. On the right we have various channels things are enabled for. So we have a story here that's Android only, for example. And I'll come back and explain release later. Our next section we have, so these are sort of arbitrary sections I've defined based off ways that we can sort of logically think about our stories. So the navigation section was really navigating between any two pages in your application. The page detail are actions you do within a page. And so here we have some stories which are grayed out. This is because they're coming in a future sprint. So the BA's working a little bit ahead here. And for the purposes of grooming, we have a button so you can see them. We also abide by the similar convention. This is a little bit different in that it's not moving between pages, so it's tagged back to a single page. And so that's quite helpful to scan all of these down the left-hand side if you wanted to see which pages have things you can do on the username page. We can see quite quickly there's nothing you can do. You can do actions within the password and terms and condition pages. The next one to show is the validation section. This is where the meat comes in. So this is kind of our negative feedback or negative actions. And again, we have the same convention down the left-hand side, but we have some more meaty stories. So we have various actions, and then they show various prompts. or textual items. So in our business case, we need to be able to brand for a lot of different financial institutions. In America, there's, I guess from my perspective, an oddity that there's 10,000 FIs, unlike New Zealand where there's, you can probably count them on your hands. So we have a lot of FIs, and the way we enable branding is we have kind of a key value pair mapping, and so the key is specified here and the value is shown in the speech bubble there. The other thing to call out while we're here as well is to define how the screen looks. We have a convention here which refers to another specification. So we're trying to keep our stories as thin as possible. So the next thing I wanted to show, which I kind of led into before with these things here, the prompts, is this is the prompts or text data coming directly from the code base. And so this is always going to align to what would end up in production. So this is quite exciting for BAs because we know that there's some solid checking and information behind this. And so, yeah, you can see all the values on the right and the keys on the left. We also had, if I scroll back up, the top, our Glyphy diagram also had prompt keys specified here as well, because our core business case is really the prompt keys, not so much the values. We just need to be able to respect the values. Okay, so the next section I wanted to show, it's not a section as such, I guess, is where this data comes from. So we use SpecFlow, being that we're a .NET oriented company, except for, I guess, our UI pieces in Android and iOS. And so we previously saw a description, so that comes from here. We saw a number of navigation stories, which we can see the stories here, and these tags are what we use to pull them out into different sections. So as I said before, the sections are somewhat arbitrary. You can pick maybe basic, alternate, and exception flow if that was your preference. And also I think before I showed an Android only story, so we have various tags as well that allow us to restrict our test cases and specification to highlight that we're showing an Android specific situation. In this situation, Android has a back button, iOS doesn't, so that's why this is an Android specific story. Okay, so the next thing to show is the prompt file. Let's see if I can find that one. Interesting. Okay, I might skip over that one. But the way in which the prompt keys are written in our wiki is we specify the keys in this syntax here, which is a syntax I just created for our purpose. And then that prompt key, if you put the prompts in the wiki with the feature file, it will combine together using some scripting magic to kind of join them back together. Okay, so the next thing I'll show is a different specification at a different level. So this is a highly structured specification, and so we would tend to do this for our sort of major feature sets. But there are some sort of almost non-functional requirements or looser requirements, more abstract requirements that have value being specified in a different way. And one of these for us is the back navigation specification. So for us, we have three different kind of back behaviors. If you're going through the login flow, for example, which is this one here, you tend, if you hit back, you go back to the start because you can't go back to the previous page. After you've logged in, you can go back to the previous page, and for modal dialogues, you can go back to the page you came from as well, but it's a little bit different because it specifies which button it comes from. So we have various diagrams. This one's probably the most exciting one, where if you're making a transfer, for example, You might come in here and enter your money, you might come in here and confirm, and then you come here to a result page. Once you've done a transfer, it makes no sense to come back to the previous page, so you go back to the start of the flow. So this is, I'm really trying to highlight an abstract specification, which kind of works in tandem with our other previous specification. So we try to encourage specifying at different levels. And the real sales pitch behind something more generic like this is that it enables us to share it across different product lines with a similar wanted behavior. And so, just to cover it while I'm here, previously I demonstrated the story which had the various conventions. I think it referred to the halt dialogue. I'll just go down and find that. I think it was a validation story. So, okay, we'll have a look at this story. So this story here is referring to a blocked message type. And so that is referring to this one here, which has two positive actions hanging off it. So it gives us a way of kind of describing what the expected behavior is without needing to repeat ourselves every time we come into a two-button dialogue. We can just say we're expecting a block style dialogue. And there's other options here, ones with single button, ones with one positive, one negative, and things like that. Okay. The next, I guess, delighter feature for me was that we have a release version. So one thing which has always been painful for us in the past has been trying to snapshot our specifications for delivery. And so I wanted to get it so that we didn't need to snapshot it. Instead, we would try and journal it. So what I mean by that is if you've seen MSDN or the Java development documentation, you can choose the version of the documentation you want to look at within the document. So for this project here, we have 1.0, which is in production, and our production support would tend to typically look at that documentation, and for 1.1 that is currently in development. So I'll show you an example of what a story looks like when it changes. So we have this fairly large story. Let's see if I can make that a bit better. Okay, so that's a little bit more readable. So you can see that there's quite a number of cases here. There's 8 cases on this story. And this story here is for unsupported version handling message. We can also see in the right hand column that it's for version, it's been introduced in version 1.1. If we go and roll it back to what it was, it's this story here. So this story here becomes deprecated, or kind of it won't be touched after 1.1, and we've kind of end-dated it, saying that this only applies to our first release. So it switches those stories out based on the attributes we had in Visual Studio. So these attributes here. I'll show you what one of the 1.1 looks like. So yeah, here this one's an end-dated one. So when we create them, we don't end-date them. When we deprecate them, we do. And so there'll be another copy of this story here. So this is the old one we saw with 4 lines. And then this is the new one with 8 lines. So when someone does that, they would copy it and then move forward with it. Okay, so the next thing I wanted to show, we can go back to that, is our mock data. So with our mock data, this is all sitting in XML under our web services. And this is something which, instead of pointing to an actual banking system, it can just hit those mock data scenarios. And this enables us to log in locally. One thing we always found was we were maintaining what this mock data was by hand, and it would get grossly out of date. And so what we did is I thought, well, we've got the XML, how about we just transform it into our wiki? So if the mocks change because someone edits them when maybe they shouldn't, or they don't notify people, this will automatically update within 5 minutes. And it gives an idea of the kind of data that comes back as well. So that is kind of more for a QA level, where they might be thinking, okay, I understand that we have an above max app version response, but I want to know how that looks like. So this gives an idea of the SOAP response there. But it's not saying that it's not limited to SOAP. To put all of those mocks into context, we have a diagram here. Just zoom in a bit, which kind of gives the relationship between our user interface pages, this being our login page. Then there's this service call, which links off to that service spec. Then we've got our password page. Then we have a link off to our authenticate service call spec. So all these things in red are service calls. And so it gives an idea of the relationship. The reason why we've pulled service calls out of our UI spec is our web service is kind of shared by multiple channels. So we should specify it once somewhere else. And then our UI spec, we have multiple channels. So we're trying to, again, not repeat content. So I'll show you what the authenticate spec looks like just quickly. So again, we've got a description that comes from our Gherkin or spec flow. We've got some stories, which our platformers or our developers have written. And then we have a sequence diagram. So it didn't really make sense to have a sequence diagram from the UI layer, but from the platform or our web service level, it does. And the reason why is that it helps our QA understand what our web services are doing, because we have about 12 different sort of back-end systems that could potentially be being touched. And equally, when we touch those back-end systems, there could be pricing implications and things like that. So we want QA to be conscious of what our web services do. And it's not typically an area that they are able to treat in a way that other than a black box. And kind of try to test the entries and exit points. And so this gives them kind of a high-level overview of what's happening. The next piece is a developer who's decided that he doesn't like how it is. And so what he's done is he's drawn a diagram of how he wants it to be. So it's a good way of visualizing technical debt, because we can compare what we have, what we want it to be, and that's our start of our gap analysis. Let's see. So I'll go back to the UI spec because there's a couple of areas left. This is our UX teams area. We try to sandbox them in an area, so they're free to add any content they want to add here. And then that's a way that they can contribute without sort of overwriting things previously. Requirements can kind of, we've got to sort of work with them and make sure that we're incorporating them into the proper sprint process. And so this is a great way of doing that, because they can make updates immediately and they don't come into effect immediately. And then we have a few assets as well down the bottom. So I'll move back to my presentation now. Let's see. So what came out of this for us? We managed to reduce our time and cost of writing specifications, and especially in maintaining them. So there's probably, if I had to guess, maybe a 20% ability to write these faster, but it's not so much about writing specifications in this way faster. It's more about reducing the maintenance costs, and for us it's certainly reduced maintenance considerably. And we've also enabled ourselves to get greater consistency, which is making me quite happy. And also, because I come from a development background historically, I like the idea of writing less to try and say more. And so a lot of our conventions are trying to have implied conventions behind them. Things like in our stories we assume the positive case, so we don't say when a user's logging in that they're locked out and things like that. But we do specify the negative case and things like that. So we have found ways of being able to write less and have more meaning. We also are looking into the increased sharing of context. So previously we had a bit of an issue around sometimes understanding where requirements came from and writing them in a given when then story sort of syntax has helped us somewhat. I don't think it's fully got us to a utopian level or anything like that, but it's certainly helped us with the context behind what we're doing and working out where requirements came from. If I haven't convinced you already, this is probably the most solid piece of the sales pitch. On the left we have our previous project, or in fact this project which was being talked about in this is causing the symptoms which we wanted to resolve. This project here is a similar sized project which we implemented this fully, and this one here is where we did it in a sort of hybrid model. And so we've managed to halve the defects by doing a hybrid model. We've managed to reduce it by maybe 70% by sort of fully embracing this. There could be other factors, like maybe we're further along in our Agile journey and things like that, but certainly this seems to paint a strong picture in my mind. We've improved our fix first time from about 85% to I think 99% on this project compared to this project. And we've reduced our defect counts, as you can see, significantly. And so that kind of covers, I guess, the things I was expecting to find or hoping to get out of this. But the things which were kind of unexpected for me were the social change aspects. And so Goiko kind of covered this a little bit in his keynote. But really our old process kind of involved the BA would be writing the spec. Then if the team got time, there'd be a bit of a spec review at the end of the sprint after the software is developed and it's been tested. There might be a bit of a look at the spec to see how it aligns. This sort of seemed to somewhat happen, but not 100% happen. So we weren't trapping all spec challenges in the sprint. And then changing to this process, we found that QA suddenly had skin in the game. And this was the real surprise learning for me. What ended up happening, because we're writing our specification in spec flow, the team will try to look at it before maybe they take it into the sprint, and you try to look at it, but you look at it from an academic angle of, oh yeah, we're going to do that tomorrow and that sort of thing. But once QA need to automate it, about the second day in the sprint, about here, the QA come back and harass the BA, and that's absolutely great because we need feedback in the sprint early. We don't want it at the end of the project 6 weeks out from delivery. And so that was quite surprising that came out as a social outcome, because it wasn't something I was particularly expecting to happen. And so out of our social evolution, I sort of observed positive early conflict, which is good. Keeps the BA on their toes. And the business analyst is held to account in sprint because we're automating their work. People are casting a very keen eye over what they're doing, which is a bit different to before, where people are more kind of looking at a higher level to see that there's something there. And the team started blurring responsibilities, which I thought was really great. And again, Goiko kind of mentioned this, in that your team should work together to shift towards what the outcomes need to be, as opposed to saying, I'm a dev, I don't test, things like that. And this sort of naturally happened over time, rather than us telling the team to do this. They seemed to build empathy for each other and ended up building trust as well, which has always been something we struggled with in the first half of a recent project, where we're sort of thinking, how can we get our team engaged? We tried all sorts of things and then gave up, and then eventually it ended up kind of happening. So I suspect it could be to do with changing this process a little bit, to kind of force people to step on each other's toes a little bit more. And so I recommend trying to maybe throw a few curveballs in there for your team to try and get that positive conflict going on early. The team started cross-skilling more commonly. This was something in our business that was always a challenge historically, because we have kind of a .NET backhouse kind of stack. We've got mobile in the front end, so there's a lot of different languages and things to learn. From the business side, I'd love it if everyone's kind of cross-functional. I just give you the work and you kind of do it. And so that started happening as people bought into the outcome and what needed to be achieved. And one surprising example which I found was a strike team formed for a problem where 2 developers moved their workstations onto one desk, and they managed to really churn through the work, and they just decided to do that. That wasn't sort of me going, so that was a pleasant surprise as well. So in summary, we've looked at the business challenge that we faced, and I think that sort of a challenge in maybe different shapes or forms has possibly happened in probably all of your companies. I've seen it happen in other companies I've worked in quite frequently. It might be the dev aspect of it, it might be the QA aspect. We're all on an agile journey, as I see it, and we're all looking to try and get better. So, and we also looked at what we believe was causing it, which for us was our 3 amigos not being tightly knit. And I also argued that the relevance of our problem could or maybe does apply to different businesses outside of Fiserv. I suspect it could be a good majority of businesses. And then also we looked at the solution and demo, and I've just sort of gone through the various results, with probably the most compelling piece being that graph. So where to next for us? So we're going to try and get product-wide rollout. We've done it on one product line, we've hybrided another, and then there's another one kind of waiting to be taken on. So we're looking to get full rollout, because it, from our perspective, looks like a good option. And we're looking to continuously improve this idea. So I'm keen, if anyone violently objects to the things I've shown today, to come up and give me a chat. And equally, we're looking to create more buy-in. And that initially, when we kind of did it, we kind of just threw it out there. Whereas now we're looking to bring more people on board and try and coach some of these things in. And also, I guess if you are interested in this sort of thing for your company, there are various options like Fitness is quite a big one, I believe. SpecLog is a little bit off to the side, but that integrates with SpecFlow and does some of the stuff I've shown today. And then for people who use Jira plus Confluence, that's a plugin that integrates the two. So those are 3 off-the-shelf solutions you could look into. Yeah. Thank you.
Thanks, Richard. We've got about 1 minute for questions. So, any questions for Richard? Let's start with over here.
I quite like the tool that you showed us with the screen flows and the way you named the screens instead of numbered the screens and all that sort of stuff. So is that a hybrid Fiserv tool, or does Fiserv license it out to other users, or what's the story?
We don't license it at the moment, but it is, I guess, a secret plan of mine to try and work with my boss to see if we can't roll it into our software development kit. Because I believe, I mean, if it adds value for us, maybe it adds value for our customers as well. The core piece with the diagramming tool, that was a pay-to-download Confluence plugin called Gliffy. So yeah, you can purchase that. That's, yeah.
Was there one more question?
Just how long did it take you for all process to process? What was the timeline?
The timeline was a year, but the reason why was because I kind of was writing the specification while I was making this framework. So I was trying to use the time savings I was getting out of writing it this way to make the framework. So it was kind of a bit of an experiment that kind of got away from me, and I sort of thought maybe this would help get me started, and maybe later on I'd kind of copy it into the old way we did things. But yeah, it seemed to just hold its own, so we just sort of slowly kept going and plugging on with it. It's only about 300 lines of PowerShell that is doing all of this various stuff. So we have a build server behind the scenes, and that executes that PowerShell, and it just transforms our various assets we have in TFS into HTML format, and then Confluence can reference HTML.
Final question.
Who generates your ideas for your business development, your delivery, or the stage for other roles? So who those ideas?
Which ideas? This auto.
Your product.
So we have two halves of our team. One half is in the US, and so it's my boss's counterpart's kind of team. So my boss is Murray there, and
so we have a product management organisation spread across the US and New Zealand. The New Zealand arm that Richard belongs to is pretty much focused on the delivery side of it, and then the teams in the US are much closer to the market. So we've got sort of 10 million users in the US, and so our team in the US is kind of owns the US, the customer market facing end of things, and so but during a project, so we have a product manager in the US working with a product owner in New Zealand, and they kind of collaborate. It's a bit of a symbiotic relationship. Yeah, a lot of stuff comes directly from the US.
Thanks very much. Any further questions? I think Richard, you'll be around.
yeah, I'll hang around
for
if
the day.
anyone
So we've got another session starting in here in a few minutes at 12 o'clock. That's Craig McCormick from Xero's is talking about Principle 9. Next door in Rangimarie, we have Bernard O'Leary from Core Plus Group. He's presenting on surfing the wave of emergent design. And back in the Soundings Theatre where we started off this morning, we've got Edwin Dando talking about alternatives to scaling your Agile process.